Every great school has great programs. Every great school places students in top colleges. Every great school has great faculty, great staff. There's no doubt about it. To be a great school, you have to have a great athletic program, a great STEM program, a great English program, a great philosophy program, travel programs. Those are part of the deal when you're dealing with education. More importantly, though, Pacifica is more than just great programs. At Pacifica, our goal is to form students. We want to form character, faith, virtue. We want to form hearts, minds, and the soul of each student. That formation is very important. If all we do is graduate students from high school, place them to great colleges, and help them build great resumes, we have missed the mark. Pacifica's mission and vision is much deeper than that. At Pacifica, you will have a great resume. You have a long list of accomplishments to put on your resume. You will get placed in a great college. You can have a great resume, but perhaps you might not have a great life. We all know people that are really accomplished, that have great educations, that have been successful in life, and they're not great people. We see them in media, we see them in politics, we see them in athletics, all across our culture. Great resumes, great educations, but not great people. And at Pacifica, we're forming lives. We're building lives. We like to talk about building lives rather than building resumes. If you build a great resume, you may not have a great life. But if you build a great life, you will have a great resume. And so those are important ideas for us at Pacifica. 3 or 4 years ago, when my daughter was a freshman in college, she had gone through Pacifica and had a Pacifica education, really enjoyed this idea of forming lives, of really being into school to grow and develop as a human being. Not just using school, the utility of school to get through it, but actually growing as an individual. She went off to college. She went to UCLA, which is close by our home. And at UCLA, she loved it. She had a great experience. However, at the end of her first year, during Easter break, she came home. And she said, Dad, it's not clicking all the time for me. Everybody seems to know exactly what they want to do. Everyone's got it all mapped out. They have their internships, their classes. People seem to be interested in taking the easiest class possible just to get through it. They're using education as a means to some other end. And she said, Dad, I am really excited about digging into education as an end in itself, not as a means to another end. And I said, Lindsay, you're building your life. You're not building a resume. And you know who you are, you know what direction you're going in. And so that's more important than knowing what you want to do. Because you can do anything you want to do, but knowing yourself and knowing your direction is more important. So she felt good about that pep talk during Easter break. We drove her back to school up on the hill at UCLA. And on the hill, there's 10,000 students that live there. So you can imagine the mad rush as the cars pull up to drop kids off, Ubers from the airport coming back from Easter break. Students everywhere. So we pull up, Lindsay gets out of the passenger side of the car, and she begins to disappear into the crowd. And I get out of my driver's side and peer over the top of the car and watch her disappear. And as she does, I said, Hey, Lindsay. I yelled to her, Hey, Lindsay. And she turned around and I said, Hey, go build your life. And she smiled, turned around and slipped away in the crowd. She knew exactly what I was talking about. Building lives, not simply resumes. And that's what we're up to at Pacifica. The other thing to mention here is that a lot of her colleagues in freshman and sophomore year at UCLA went to schools that were simply about information delivery and graduation requirements. They just gave them a ton of information, APs, take as many APs as possible, content, learn a lot of content, and even some skills, writing, debate, that sort of thing. And so we're much more at Pacifica than information delivery. We certainly do deliver a lot of information. As a school, you have to deliver information, you have to teach skills. But again, it's more than that. It's more than just information. It's more than skill building. It's building community. It's building lives. It's building people of direction and purpose, people that have meaning, that know what life's about. So yeah, you will get a lot of information at Pacifica. You will learn a lot of skills at Pacifica, but it doesn't end there at all. And I think a lot of her colleagues in school were just burned out on education. They were like, I don't even like this. What's the point? I'm just getting a lot of information, learning some skills. I guess it's for a career, right?
Yeah.
But it's more than that. That's right. I mean, I think that we want to develop kids who are curious. And I think that really comes from hiring faculty and staff who are really curious. And so one of the things we do at Pacific when we talk to our staff when they come in, when we hire, is that we want to hire people who are already living a certain type of life. They're living a life of the mind. They're living a life of meaning and purpose. They're pursuing their faith. They're living an authentic life. They're not putting it on like, okay, I'll put this on when I come to the classroom, but I'm really not living this way elsewhere. I mean, I like to talk about, I would be doing these things even if students weren't at the school. I'd be reading these books, I'd be pursuing this life. So the kids are getting in on the life of the adults, this authentic life they're living, and they kind of catch it because it's not fake, it's actually real. And so when you're part of that community and you feel that authenticity, I think it's magical in a way. And a lot of people come into Pacifica and say, there's something about this place that's just different. Well, what it is, it's humility. It's people who are humbly trying to grow. They understand they're not perfect. They understand they have work to do. They understand that there's a long road ahead, but they're humbly trying to grow and get better and live a life of thinking and living well, live a life of flourishing. So that staff is really key for us, who we bring in. One of the most important academic values at Pacifica is this idea of intellectual hospitality or intellectual charity. And I'll explain it like this. Many times when students read a book in high school, when I read a book in high school, I'd maybe read the first 10 pages and throw it down and say, that's boring, just to completely dismiss the author's point altogether. And that's not hospitable. That's not charitable to the author. That's really dismissing the author before you've given the author a chance. So what we're trying to train our students to do first and foremost is to listen. Listen first. So read the book, or at least read half the book before you throw it down and say it's boring. If you've read half the book, or hopefully all of the book, and then you put it down and say, I disagree, I didn't like it, it wasn't valuable, fair enough. You've first been hospitable to the author, you've been hospitable to what the author's trying to say, and then you've taken it in and developed an opinion versus just dismissing it out of hand. And we try to do that in the class too. When the students are involved in discussion, it's really important that they listen to their peers first and not just dismiss them because their ideas may be different, but really take it in and be charitable to the other person. I mean, that's an incredible value, and it takes tremendous humility. At the root of all of our academic program is humility. That's a tremendous academic virtue, is being humble, listening, understanding that there's more to know. If you come into class thinking you know everything, thinking you're the smartest person in the room, you're really limiting yourself to learning. So we encourage our students to be humble, and that hopefully allows them to listen to their peers, take it in. And again, they don't have to agree at the end of the day. They can totally disagree, but they've listened first. And that really creates an environment for all of our kids to flourish. We don't dismiss. And in fact, we don't even really talk a lot about debate. There is a time and place for debate. There's no doubt about it. But debate's one form of communication. We talk about conversation. We're having the great conversation about really important things in life, meaningful things. What's the meaning of life? What does it mean to love others? What does it mean to live a life of flourishing, a successful life, an abundant life? What does it mean? What's my nature? Am I good? Am I bad? We ask these important questions, and it's really important that we're having a conversation rather than a debate in this format. And so kids pick up on that. They love the conversation. They love the intellectual hospitality. They love the charity, but they're so used to not having that environment. They're so used to kind of debating, to disagreeing, and dismissing people out of hand. And so intellectual charity is a big part of who we are at Pacifica. And you walk around campus, you see kids, and they're engaged in discussion at lunch. They're engaged in discussion about all kinds of things. Certainly they talk about sports and fashion and those type of things and the prom. But they're also engaged in discussion about what happened in class, but they're doing it with charity, with humility, with an interest in growing. And so that's the esprit de corps. That's the spirit of the Pacifica classroom. I think as students are reading texts and listening to authors and hearing from authors, hearing from their professors or teachers, hearing from their peers, the idea is to take in the other person's point of view first, to try to understand it, to try to grasp it, to try to internalize it before they disagree. They may end up agreeing with it, or they may end up disagreeing with it. But the first idea is to take it in and give the other person's voice a hearing and allow it to settle in first before you dismiss it. Sometimes it's easy for students they hear a word they don't like or a phrase they don't like or something doesn't connect with them quickly and they dismiss it. They have this attention span that's very short. And we want the information from the other to settle into who they are before they make a decision on what they think about it. In fact, This may be a little bit controversial, and I'll say it strongly, but then I'll explain. We really don't want to give students a voice. We don't want them. We don't want to hear their voice. Now, I don't really mean that. So let me explain what I really mean. Is that we want them to have a voice. We do, but we want the voice to come from somewhere. And we don't want it to come from just social media or just their opinion they're thinking about. We want their voice to come from an informed position. So, what have you read? Who have you listened to other than yourself? Have you listened to your teacher? Have you listened to your parents? Have you listened to the voice of the past? Your peers? Have you listened to them? And as you listen to them and take in all that information, you're formulating your own voice. But it's coming from a place of humility. It's coming from somewhere. And so, too often in education today, we dismiss everybody else's voice for our own voice. And so, my voice is going to be much richer if I take in other people's opinions, thoughts, ideas, writings, where they're coming from, and then I internalize it first as I'm developing my voice. So I definitely want students to share their voice. We definitely want to help students have a voice, but we want it to come from a place. And certainly, listen, I mean, there's a great conversation that's been going on for thousands of years, long before I was here or you were here, right? And so there's a lot of wisdom out there. There's a lot of bad ideas, a lot of good ideas. So what we want to do is also respect the past and the voices of the past that have come along and go, hey, wait, maybe they have something. But maybe I can offer something to that conversation as well. What do I have to offer? But it's not just all me, right? It's part of the greater conversation. It's going to be people that come after me, come after us. They're going to have opinions and thoughts to add to the greater conversation. So it's a collective wisdom of the ages, so to speak, past, present, and future that's really important. And I think this goes to also our view of history at Pacifica. History is not popular these days. Most people, most schools, most individuals are dismissing history. Everything that's in the past is wrong, bad, old, outdated, or whatnot. And everything in the present is good, but it's really all about the future. When we took college trips with our kids, we visited a number of schools, and it was striking to see the difference between like a school like, say, Notre Dame and a school like Stanford. Incredible schools. Both schools are incredible. We resonated more with Notre Dame, even though Stanford's a great school. At Stanford, here's what we heard. We heard all about the future. We heard all about what are you going to do for the future? What are you going to do for humanity? Which is a great thing to say. But at Notre Dame, we heard, here's what's going on in the past, here's what's going on in the present, and here's what's going on in the future. And that resonated with us so much because it's not just about the past, it's not just about the present, it's also about the future. It's about all three of those things collectively. And we thought that was really resonated with us. Stanford resonated as well, but again, it's more about the future, not much about the past. So we respect the past, understanding there's some great things about the past, some things that are not so great about the past that we need to sift through, and then live in the present, and then prepare for the future. So that's the kind of education that Pacificans are going to get. Homage to the past, living in the present, prepared and excited about the future. We also think that Christ embodies that. Christ took care of our past, the mistakes we made, the things that we've done. He stands with us in the present, and he's got our future. And so all three of those places come together at Pacifica. They come together in Christ, and we just are super excited about that. We went and visited a number of years ago the Kate School up in Santa Barbara. The Kate School is a boarding school, beautiful school. And we toured one half of the school first, the lower half. And at the Kate School, we walked into these classrooms, and there were chalkboards. This is like 10 years ago, right? Chalkboards and globes and wooden desks. And really, the classrooms were really small and really only enough for 10 students. And I said, well, this is kind of outdated. Like, what are they doing here? And I began to realize that part of the school was an homage to the past. They didn't want to change it. They wanted chalkboards and globes and wooden desks because they felt like kids can learn with good ideas. They can learn in small groups. We don't have to have bigger classrooms. And then I walked into the old gym with the chalkboard and the wooden backboards, and I go, well, that's kind of old. It's kind of interesting, kind of quaint, kind of cute. But then I went to the other half of the campus, which was completely state-of-the-art. Brand new gym, technology, big classrooms, all the technology you can ever imagine. And what they were saying at Kate was the past is important, the present is important, and the future was important. I was impressed by that. And that's what we want at Pacific. We want to be in all three of those places, in all three of those spaces, because we think that's going to help kids flourish. Community is really important to us at Pacifica. Relating authentically to each other, freshmen to sophomores, sophomores to juniors, juniors back to freshmen, that community of students kind of relating together. And also staff relating to students, staff relating to each other, parents participating with administrators and teachers. It's a really great community. And one of the ways that's manifested is through this idea and motto of no one sits alone. So if we see someone sitting alone at lunch or in the courtyard or in the classroom sitting alone, that's a problem for us. That's a problem for us as individuals, as a community, not for the person sitting alone, but for the rest of us. It's our job to go and pick that person up. Our job is to go and invite that person in. Now, unless they just want space and free time, which is fine, they can have that. But if they're feeling alone and isolated, that's on all of us. So it's really a group effort for all of us. And so faculty demonstrate that, staff demonstrate that, upperclassmen demonstrate that. We have a mentor-mentee program where seniors and juniors mentor freshmen and sophomores. So there's this collaboration back and forth. That's really powerful. And in fact, some of the mentees and mentors have stayed friends post high school and post college, which is great. So you might have a senior mentoring a freshman, and then 5, 6, 7, 10 years later, they're still they're still texting each other, still meeting up for coffee. So this idea of community, of no one sitting alone. At Pacifica, if you want to be anonymous, it's not the right place for you. If you want to be known, it's the perfect place for you. And in fact, about 12 years ago, we had a student who applied to Pacifica and applied to one of the top private schools on the West Side, probably the top private school on the West Coast for that matter. And he lived close by Pacifica, and he was really wrestling with his choice. And I interviewed him. He was an 8th grade student, really well-spoken, and he just really knew himself. He sat down with me and took the time to explain to me why he was going to go to the other school and not Pacifica, even though he lived in the neighborhood, could ride his bike. He said, Mr. Knight, he said, I want to go to a school where I'm not known, where I kind of have to find it out for myself, where I can be an individual and kind of more anonymous. And I don't think I need to be at a school where I'm known and where I'm going to be part of a community. He goes, nothing against community, but I just want to be in a place where I'm kind of have to be anonymous. So Pacifica, to be clear, is a place where you're going to be known. You're going to be known and not anonymous. And so if that's attractive, if that familial setting and that community is attractive to you, it's a great place to come to school. One of the ways to imagine Pacifica is like a mosaic. A mosaic is composed of individual tiles, these small, really important tiles that make up a larger picture. And if you just look at the tile, you can't see the larger picture. And when you pan out and you look at the larger picture, you see something beautiful, something crafted, something designed. It's beautiful, and you can understand what it is. And then when you pan in on the specific tile, you can't see the bigger picture anymore. You see the tile. Each tile on that mosaic is extremely important. And it's up to us as students to get to know each specific tile in the mosaic of our education, right? And so faculty and staff may understand maybe 500 tiles of a 1,000 tile mosaic because they've lived the life a little longer. If the mosaic is God's creation, maybe I understand 500 tiles. Whereas in high school, maybe I understood 100 tiles, right? Maybe when I'm old and ready to go into heaven, maybe I'll understand 800 tiles. And maybe when I get to heaven, I'll understand the entire picture, right? And so students, as part of their education, it's really important for them to uncover each tile, like a Shakespearean sonnet, or like an understanding of the Treaty of Versailles, or understanding a theorem. These are all important tiles for us to understand. But they also have to understand how each tile connects to the whole. That they're not just on an island by themselves, they're connected to a greater picture that God's designing. So at Pacifica, one of the thrilling things is to help students understand each specialized tile, but how it relates to the larger whole of God's creation and God's design. And so can you specialize in economics in college? Yes. Can you specialize in architecture in college? Can you specialize in engineering in college? Certainly. Can you specialize in certain areas at Pacifica? You can. But one of our goals is to help students see the bigger picture as well, not just each individual tile. Because if you know the tiles and then know the bigger picture, that's more of a life of flourishing. So at Pacifica, it's important for each student to examine and explore different topics. So in physics, they're going to explore many different topics in physics and to get to know those really, really well. But we also want them to learn the art of poetry, of writing and reading poetry. We also want to be well read in humanities. We want them to be learning languages, doing the arts. We love them to be working on their body and physical education, sports, those type of things. A number of years ago, we brought on a teacher who had his undergraduate degree in engineering and his graduate degree in business. And so when we began to talk and talk about ideas and things, he was really well versed in science and math, economics and business, and kind of understood the world that way. But he was also really well read in history, which I was surprised by how much history he had read as well. He had one of his favorite presidents was Lincoln. He had read Lincoln's debates, his speeches, all those type of things. And so it was really cool to understand that side of him too. And so that's the kind of student we're trying to put together at Pacifica, students that can specialize in the area but are well-rounded. It's kind of a liberal arts education where students are getting depth in a certain subject but also breadth as well. We think that at Pacifica, if you go out to major, let's say, in engineering or nursing or business or architecture, any of those majors, that you're going to be a better nurse, a better engineer, a better business person if you understand the whole and have a liberal education. So specializing in those fields, but also undergirding all that with a liberal education, with breadth. Pacifica's student body is composed of people from many different backgrounds. We have students that have wealth, we have students that have not much, we have students that are in the middle class, we have students who are strong in their faith, they're Protestants, we have students who are Catholic, we have students who are agnostic, we have students who are secular, we have students who are atheist. We have Jewish students, we have Muslim students, we have students from all backgrounds coming to Pacifica to ask important questions. And so one of the things that's important to us at Pacifica is that they understand the Christian worldview. So they're going to take classes in Old Testament, they take classes in New Testament, they're going to take classes in church history. They're going to learn the totality of the Christian worldview and have this rich conversation about it. But that's not all there is. There's a whole other side to the coin. There's ideas out there that are counter to the Christian worldview. And so we offer a senior level class in atheism. And you might say, that's kind of strange for a Christian school to be offering a class in atheism. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not trying to promote atheism. We're trying to help students walk through the ideas of atheism so they're familiar with it. So when they go out into college, they are well-rounded and they can have a really important conversation. And so if you don't have that conversation with them, when they go to college, they're going to have those conversations and go, where was this in 9th and 10th grade? It's really, really important. And so that class in atheism is key for us to help them see the other side of the coin so that they get the Christian worldview, they get the secular worldview as expressed in atheism, and then they can go into the world ready to have a conversation about all of it. We don't want to hide anything from them. We want to present it all. We think God's big enough for them to wrestle with all these different ideas. And so we sent a student out a number of years ago who went to Berkeley. Happened to be a Christian student, strong on his faith. He was into theater at Pacifica and also computer science. And when he got to Berkeley, he had two other roommates, both atheists. And so he began to have discussions with them, and they were shocked that he had read all these works on atheism and read this literature. They had certainly read those things, but they were kind of embarrassed. And what they were embarrassed by is that they hadn't read anything on the Christian side that he had read, anything on Augustine, anything on the church fathers. They hadn't really read the New Testament. And so, to be honest, they wanted to explore that. So they wanted to be more balanced. So they began to ask him for a list of Christian works that they could read as atheists, right? So I thought that was really cool. And so he called back and said, I really appreciate my Pacifica education because as a Christian, I was encouraged in my faith, but I was also given these tools to look at the other side of the coin to help engage people that might be different than me. And he had this great experience at Berkeley with his roommates, with this kind of intellectual hospitality, this intellectual charity in this conversation, but he was educated that way at Pacifica. So we're not trying to hide things from kids. We think they can handle the conversation. We're trying to build them up, and we're trying to grow them and prepare them for the world. We believe at Pacifica that there's a reality other than ourselves, that we aren't just the center of the universe. And so we believe there is a reality that is outside of us, that there is a God that has a purpose and a plan for our life. And part of our role as human beings is to explore what God is up to, what God wants for us. And so we live in a day and age where we kind of have dismissed God, maybe God is dead, and we become the center of the universe, and what we like and what we think and what we do dominates everything about who we are. And so it's about who we are and what our tastes are and what our view of ourselves are and what we do for a living and what we study, and it becomes all about us. And so we begin to conform the world to who we are and conform reality to who we are as human beings. And I think there's another way to look at it. I think there's another way to look at it, that the part of the role that we have as human beings is to try to see what God is up to outside of us and maybe conform our wills to his will. And I know that's countercultural because we're so wanting everyone to conform to who we are. And so at Pacifica, we're kind of twisting things a little bit differently and saying, okay, God, what are you up to? What do you want? How can we conform our will to your good plan? Because we think that's really good for human flourishing. We believe there's something bigger than ourselves out there that we need to explore. It's not just all about us and who we are as individuals. And we certainly live in a culture of expressive individualism, is kind of celebrating, and who I am as a person is celebrating. We should celebrate each individual, there's no doubt about it. But we need to keep in mind that there's something more out there. There's something bigger than us that we need to consider. And so I'm afraid we've kind of turned inward too much, and kind of begin to focus too much on who we are as individuals and left out the bigger picture, left out the bigger community. And so our goal at Pacifica is to help students know who they are, certainly, and know what they're about and what they like and dislike, their passions, their giftedness, but also begin to explore things beyond themselves, things greater than themselves, things in their community, things of God, and how they might conform their will to what God's will is, rather than trying to conform everyone around them to who they are. As we explore what God is up to, as we explore the bigger picture, as we explore things outside of ourselves and begin to conform our will to God's plan, we begin to understand a lot of things. First of all, we begin to understand who we are, how we're made, who we are. We begin to understand the world and how God's made the world, and we begin to understand our place in the world. And there's no better understanding to understand who we are, what the world's about, and our place in the world. It gives us meaning, purpose, and direction. So there's two different kind of paradigms. There's the ancients, as represented in Athens and also Jerusalem. In Athens, the ancients began to think about things other than themselves and understanding that there was something outside themselves. We hear this, the analogy of, or the vision of Plato's cave, right? There's something beyond this. There's something greater and more beautiful than this. And so the ancients in Athens were pursuing that. And then when we get to Jerusalem, Christ is a personification of this bigger picture, right? It's God becoming man. It's Christ sitting at the right hand of the Father and doing something scandalous by leaving the right hand of the Father, emptying himself and becoming a human being. I mean, who would ever want to leave the right hand of the Father and become a human being? Christ did it. He emptied himself, became humble. And so in that moment in Jerusalem, you have God becoming man. You have the other entering into our story. And so the ancients in Athens were pursuing that. We're pursuing this idea of the other, pursuing this idea of God and what there might be out there. And then we get kind of to the Enlightenment period and the Romantic period, this idea that coming maybe from Berlin and Paris, from thinkers like Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud, that really it's really not about the other. It's really about us. And it's about our tastes and desires. It's really about our passions. And so this is a mad pursuit of the passions, which, you know, I'm as passionate as anybody. I love the passions, but we know the passions can be good and can be really, really bad. And so the passions can, if we eat too many hamburgers, we end up with bad health, right? And so we want the passions to be in the proper order. So there's this idea that God of the ancients, the God of Athens and Jerusalem, the God of Christ, the God of the Bible, helps us order our passions properly. So we're not just victims to our passions. And so what happens if we give in to our passions, we can become slaves to them and addicted to them, and they can control us, right? And so we want our passions to be used well and used in accordance with how God sees them. And we want to kind of tame those passions so they're really, really in the right spot. So I think the Berlin kind of Paris paradigm is passion at all costs. Pursue who you are, passion, there's nothing wrong with that. And the Athens, Jerusalem paradigm is saying, there's an other out there that's going to help you take those passions and really use them well for your own flourishing.